Hi, welcome to the presentation for our paper, Movement Guidance Using a Mixed Reality Mirror. When we see our reflections in the mirror, we experience the most natural and intuitive experience that shares many characteristics of mixed reality. The natural optical reflection makes the mirror a screen that displays a virtual scene with lossless visual fidelity. At the same time, an identical representation of the user appears in the mirror, with perfect sensory motor contingency as the reflection avatar flawlessly matches their movements and expressions. The benefits afforded by mirrors have been leveraged in many application domains, including motor learning. Concurrent feedback is crucial in the acquisition phase of the motor learning process for learners to correct errors while recreating the movements demonstrated by an instructor. Concurrent visual feedback requires simultaneous awareness of both the movement guidance and one's own movement, which the mirror naturally provides. For example, in group dancing and fitness classes, instructors and learners are often co-located in front of large mirrors, so that the learners are able to observe the movement guidance from the instructor and correct their own movement while they follow along. However, this arrangement still presents a challenge to learners. They must balance between watching the instructor and attending to their own movement. Further, the disparity between the viewing angle of the instructor and of themselves in the mirror presents an additional cognitive challenge. A few pioneering works have explored the use of real augmented mirrors for supporting movement guidance, using primitive lines and shapes as guidance superimposed with learners' reflection. Despite featuring real mirrors, none of those works exploit the full potential of the mirror as a visually realistic mixed reality interface with perfect sensory motor contingency. In this work, we contribute the first formal evaluation of user performance of movement acquisition using a mirror display as a mixed reality interface. To better understand which properties of the mirror are most important for movement guidance, we operationalize the two characteristics of mirror reflection compared with non-mirror displays. First, we encapsulate the mirror's high visual fidelity and the sensory motor contingency into the independent variable fidelity. Another important component of the realistic experience offered by mirror reflections is that the spatial viewing perspective on the reflection automatically updates according to the user's head movement. We employ the second independent variable, perspective, in the study. We compared user performance across three levels of fidelity patterns. Real mirror, when participants perform movement acquisition tasks following a virtual instructor displayed on the screen overlaid with a two-way mirror. Virtual mirror, in which the virtual instructor is displayed with participants' virtual reflection instead of their real reflection on an ordinary screen. Baseline, for when participants only see the instructor on an ordinary screen without their own avatar. We also compare the acquisition performance with different perspective updating mechanisms. Dynamic, where the participant's viewing perspective on the virtual instructor is constantly calibrated to their viewing angle on the reflection following their head movement. And fixed, where the perspective is fixed according to the head position of the participant at the start of the trial, without further updating despite subsequent head movement. We measure the Euler angular offsets of the relevant joint rotations for each movement performed by the instructor and the participants as the performance of movement acquisition. We measure the offsets in the rotations which are relevant to the correct reproduction of each movement. We collect subjective ratings from participants after each trial regarding the task difficulty and embodiment over their self-representation during the task. We collected ratings on the 7-point Likert scale for the following questions. Overall, how easy do you think the task was? How much did your reflected or captured arm's action corresponded with your control? To what extent did you feel you were collocated in the same space with a virtual instructor? We assembled a mixed reality mirror setup using a two-way glass mirror overlaid in front of a 27-inch screen with a custom-built frame under a Microsoft Azure Kinect sensor. The size of the mirror display allows us to evaluate the performance of movement acquisition by measuring and providing visual feedback for a half of the body. We implemented the software of the mixed reality mirror in Unity by tracking participants' eye positions with the Kinect and updating the viewing perspective on the instructor accordingly. We employed a virtual instructor avatar without prominent features. The instructor will scale to match the body size of each participant in real time. As such, participants were able to follow the movements performed by the instructor by visually matching their reflections with the instructor's image in the real mirror condition. In the virtual mirror condition, the same task could be achieved by matching a video capture of the participants with the transparent instructor. We employed 4 movement tasks of increasing complexity, including stretch, alternating between a lower backward arm stretch, a higher backward arm stretch, and an idle state. Float, a swimming-like arm movements with the 2 arms paddling forward in alternate phases. Squat, a squat movement with the upper arms remain extended while the forearms gradually lifting as the squat sinks. Entry, an entry to the fight movement sequence with the instructor walking 2 steps forward, performing the final pose, then returning to the starting point. We obtained results from 24 participants. The stretch movement only involves the arm stretching straight out at the lower and higher positions. We argue that the limited complexity of the movement, especially along the depth axis, may be the reason why we did not find any significant result. For the float task, the performance in real mirror and virtual mirror were better than baseline in most measures, while real mirror yielded significantly better performance than virtual mirror in elbow offset. We argue that because this is a more complex movement involving 3 degrees of freedom, rotations of the shoulder and the rotation of the elbow, the benefit of seeing concurrent visual feedback of the real reflection was amplified, hence the better performance over baseline in which the participants were not able to see themselves. For elbow offset, we interpret the significant result as being likely caused by the richer depth visual information in the mirror compared with an ordinary video screen. The majority of changes in the elbow rotations in float comes from the extension and flexion of the forearm as it reaches forwards and backwards. Because the mirror reflection has superior depth information compared with the virtual reflection due to the fidelity and the stereoscopic image, we argue that the participants were able to correct themselves more easily to match the reaching motions of the instructors. For squat, we found that the virtual mirror yielded significantly worse performance than real mirror and baseline in elbow offset. As the instructor's arm bends during the squat, the forearm and the hand also extend forward. As a result, participants could recognize this motion and match the instructor more easily with their real reflection than with their virtual reflection. There were no significant results for perspective. The feedback from participants indicated that the benefit of the dynamic perspective change may be diminished by the latency during vertical body movement and the rendered perspective changes. The same reason can also explain the no significant results for perspective in the task entry. For the subjective rating of ease, we found that real mirror was consistently rated as being easier than the other fidelity conditions in the movements stretch and float, but not in squat or entry, for which it was more challenging for the participants to realize the difference in task difficulty where a large movement range and the perspective change were involved. For agency and presence, real mirror was largely rated to be significantly better than virtual mirror and baseline. For agency, real mirror received higher ratings as expected due to the instant reaction of the reflected movement and its visual fidelity, which are 2 traits that directly correlates with the sense of embodiment. Similarly, for presence, the sense of presence in real mirror is in line with previous finding that visual fidelity of the user body representation modulates the sense of presence, and that realistic sensory motor mapping between the virtual and the real body induce sense of presence in virtual environments. With the findings in our study, we make the following suggestions for future works. Future movement guidance interfaces should consider using a real mirror for better depth visualization of the learner's self-movement, especially for the movements that involve important depth motions. Future mixed reality mirror interfaces should be aware of the potential inferior acquisition outcome when they design for movements that involve large range of head motion, especially when the target movement demands continuous attention from the learners. Future mixed reality mirror interfaces should take precaution with featuring large-scale head movement toward the mirror display, because it may diminish the embodied mixed reality experience, whereas the perception of static scenes in between head movements may not be affected. Thank you for watching our presentation video. For further details, please refer to the paper.